Improvements to key commandlets. And technically in this nugget, we're going to be looking at a couple of improvements that aren't commandlets. In fact, I'll start with those. We'll talk about kind of a key little hidden improvement to PowerShell exe itself. And we'll talk about some changes that have happened to commandlet name resolution in PowerShell that, if you're used to the version 1 way, can be a little confusing, but I'll kind of explain why it's an improvement. And then we'll get into my top 5 commandlet improvements, and that'll involve convert to HTML, the service process and event log commandlets, the select string commandlet, the set strict mode commandlet, which is technically a new commandlet, but it's bringing some functionality from a commandlet that existed in version 1 and improving it. So what the heck, we're going to cover it here. And get member. Now, don't forget that there's lots of other commandlets that have gotten improvements, like get WMI object, that we've already talked about in other nuggets. So these are going to kind of be the miscellaneous bunch that I really don't want you to overlook because they've got some cool stuff. Now, since we're already on the whiteboard, let's just clear it off, make it a little bit bigger. And I want to start by talking about this name resolution thing. Here's what used to happen in version 1. If you added a snap-in, all right, first of all, let's recognize that the shell has got a lot of built-in commandlets. In version 1 of PowerShell, it was about 130, round number, commandlets. And one of those was, let's say, called get dash child item. Now in version 2, if you were to add another snap-in, and it also had a get child item commandlet, then you would get an error, because PowerShell didn't like to import two snap-ins that had the same commandlets. And even if you were somehow able to get it to load, the way you had to resolve the commandlet name was to type in the snap-in name, and then the slash, and then the commandlet name. And it was a little bit awkward, and that's actually why, in order to avoid this situation, that's why you would see people putting out commandlets like get q ad user or get ad user. And it was to help add some prefix to the noun to help avoid any kind of conflict with other commandlets like get user. So it kind of got a little bit awkward sometimes, but we all kind of learned to live with it. Well, the behaviors changed slightly in version 2. In version 2, if you already have an existing commandlet, like get child item, and you add a snap-in or a module or something else that also exports this same commandlet name, PowerShell will let it happen. So we're going to call this number 1 because that's the first one that was in the shell, that was built in. And then we loaded a module or added a snap-in that had the same commandlet name, get child item. Now what happens is if you run get child item, you're going to be running the second one. And if you need to run the first one explicitly, then you have to resort to the snap-in slash commandlet name syntax. And the reason for this is it enables a snap-in developer or a module developer to create a new improved commandlet, say a new improved get child item. Within their code, they can actually wrap the existing get child item. So you still get all that functionality. They just add more functionality to it, or perhaps tweak the way that functionality works. And so, since they've done that, you want to run theirs when it's loaded into the shell, as opposed to the one that was, already built in and loaded by default. So you still have the ability to get to the original one. You just have to use this sort of special naming syntax to do so. You'll actually see this come up a lot in things like, the Active Directory commandlets, because they offer a sort of an improved set of commandlets on top of the ones that are built into the shell that offer functionality that's specific to Active Directory. So if you're in the C drive and you run a command, it'll behave one way. If you're in the AD drive and you run that same command, it'll behave a little bit differently. So this is all sort of part of how that gets wrapped together, and one of the reasons why it's legal in the shell now. Now the next one I want to talk about is actually not a commandlet, but it's the PowerShell executable itself, PowerShell.exe. I'm going to run it with /? because a lot of people aren't aware of all the command line parameters this thing adds, so I want to just kind of spin through them quickly. First of all, there's a PS console file. You can run PowerShell.exe-PS console file, and let me just open up a new instance of PowerShell here. Let's see, accessories, PowerShell. if you load in a bunch of snap-ins or into your shell, let's say you've loaded in a third-party snap-in to help manage some web services product or whatever else, and you close the shell and then restart it, that snap-in is gone. You have to reload it every single time. Or let's just ask for get command with noun console. You can run export console. What that does is it writes out an XML file that saves the names of the current snap-ins. So it's really similar to what happens when you run the Microsoft Management Console, right? If I do start run MMC, here's the Microsoft Management Console. If I add some snap-ins to this, let's just add Active Directory users and computers and ADSI edit. Okay, those are now in my Microsoft Management Console. If I close this window, those go away. If I want to be able to reopen this same environment, I would save this as a console, as a Microsoft Management Console file. PowerShell works the same way. If I've loaded 2 or 3 snap-ins into the shell, and that's why they're called snap-ins, because it works the same as the MMC. If I've loaded 2 or 3 snap-ins, and I want to be able to bring that environment back, then I export a console file. And it's just an XML file. I can do it right now for you. Let's change to the root directory. Export console, my console. .psc1 is the normal file name extension. You can see that here, psc1. And I'm just going to make sure that goes in the root so I can find the thing. Now let's just look at it. It's just an XML file. And you can see this doesn't list any additional snap-ins. It just lists that it came from version 2 of PowerShell because I didn't have any additional snap-ins loaded. So once you've created that PSC1 file, you can force PowerShell to open up with that by running PowerShell-ps console file and giving it the name of your console file. So one thing you might do is go to your Start menu, find your Windows PowerShell shortcut, edit the shortcut on the Properties tab, and then add that -ps console here. So that way, whenever you click that shortcut on the Start menu, you're always opening it up with the same console, the same snap-ins loaded. And you can also use that if you're using this to schedule PowerShell. So if you want to schedule a PowerShell script, and that script needs 2 or 3 snap-ins, well, either the script can load them manually, or you can just point PowerShell to the console file that loads those snap-ins. Okay, so what else have we got here? Version, no logo, hides the copyright banner. That's interesting. Do not exit after running startup commands. That's fine. No profile. Do not load the user profile. Do not present an interactive prompt to the user. That was always there for. The new one is set window style. So you can set the window style to normal, which is what you get by default, minimized, maximized, or hidden. And if you're going to be running a PowerShell script, scheduling it from the command line, for example, you're going to schedule it with the -file to execute a script file, you might want to also execute with the -window style. And that way you can set the window style to hidden so that PowerShell just kind of runs in the background, does its thing, and by default, when you run it with -file, once you complete running the file, it will exit the shell automatically, so it goes away. That's why the -no exit exists. So that way you can kind of schedule it and either run a file or a command and do whatever and just have it all run silently in the background. And there are some examples down here at the end of this that'll help you figure that out. So that's one of the other really kind of cool changes. It doesn't have anything specific to do with a commandlet, but now it's time to get into the top 5 commandlet improvements in PowerShell version 2. And I guess we'll just go in the order I said. One of my favorites commandlets of all time has always been convert to HTML. You can get a bunch of services, pipe it to convert to HTML, and hit enter. And I get lots of HTML. So it might be helpful if I actually piped that out to a file, services.html. Let's take a look at that. Let's just do start run. C services.html. It's an HTML file, so it's going to open up in Internet Explorer, and it's pretty plain. You know, it's an HTML table. It's there. It's nice. It's wonderful. But, you know, a little boring. So let's take a look at what else we can do with help convert to HTML. Well, one of the things we can do is specify post content and pre content. So let me just pull this back up. pre-content is going to be the following services are running on the computer. We can also specify a dash title, services on Win Server 2. And now when I let that go out to the file, we'll open it back up again in Internet Explorer. You can see in the title bar it has picked up that title and it's added my pre-content. Post-content would of course show up down here at the bottom. But it is still kind of a little plain. Now, it was always possible to attach a style sheet in version 1, but you kind of had to fuss with it and you had to know the HTML. But now we've got this great new -CSS URI, and all you need to do is give it the URI or URL of your CSS file. Well, I'm saving this in the C directory, and I've already got a style sheet there. So I'm just going to say -CSS, give it the name of my style sheet, hit enter. Now let's run it again. See, I can change it. I changed the font size, I changed the background color, I added a border to the table cells, I made the table headings bold. And all you have to do is get a little bit knowledgeable about how CSS works. And there's some good websites and books on the subject, but Notepad, style.css. Just take a look at this. For the body element, which is the body HTML tag, I said I wanted a background color of this, which is that light gray, font color black, font face of Tahoma, and a font size of 11 pix. For the table header cells, the TH cells, I wanted a font weight of bold. And for the table data cells, the TDs, I defined that border and gave them a little bit of padding. And if you were to look at that raw file, you can see that this is the only Microsoft product that actually spits out really clean HTML. There's no Office style or anything else in here. It's just the TH cells for the table heads and the TD cells for the table data. And so it's very easy to apply whatever styles you might want to apply to this. And by doing that with a style sheet, you can have that style centralized, so that if there's a lot of different things you're outputting to HTML, they can all share that same common style sheet. Now, some of the other things you can do is specify the properties you want included, if you don't want all of them included. You can specify some specific text for the body as well, and you can specify some things to go into the head section of the HTML if you need to. That's where you used to have to plug in the information on adding a CSS to it. But this has now become really, really useful. If you can imagine doing maybe a little bit more complex of a command. Let's do get WMyObject. Let's get Win32 service, and I might do that from one or more remote computers. And then I'm going to filter those. I only want the ones where the state property is not equal to running, and yet the start mode property is equal to auto. In other words, show me everything that's set to start up automatically that isn't started, because that might be a problem. And I'll convert that to HTML. I'll specify my style sheet, because I want it to look nice. I'll specify some pre-content. The following services should be running, but are not. And we'll give it a title, potential problems. And then we'll out that to a file, and I'm just going to save it locally. But you might want to put that out to a UNC, maybe on an intranet web server. And you just get your help desk accustomed to, hey guys, every morning when you come in, click on this bookmark in your web browser, and it's going to take you to this page, which is a list of potential problem services. In this case, it's this SPPS. Okay, well, what is that? If we scroll over, enables the download, installation, and enforcement of digital licenses. Oh, well, this is a server, so that's not a problem. I won't worry about that. But that's kind of a neat way to use this, is to get some data, filter it down into some useful subset, convert it to HTML so that it can be consumed by someone from a web browser who maybe doesn't have a copy of PowerShell, and then you've kind of created a neat little tool. You can then add that to a script, put it in a batch file, schedule it to run automatically every morning at 4 a.m. so it's there and updated when the help desk shows up. So the next one is actually a set of commandlets. I know I said top 5, but this is basically one improvement. If you look at the help for get service, it has now picked up a computer name parameter. And it's not the only one. If we look at the help for get process, that did too. And if we look at the help for get event log, that did also. So now we can retrieve processes, services, and event logs from remote computers without having to resort to WMI or something like that. And the neat thing about this, always read the full help, because if you look at that computer name parameter, on some of them, okay, so not for event log. Let's get process full. And there's computer name. It'll bind that property, that parameter to pipeline input by property name. So if you pipe an object to this commandlet, and the object you pipe in has a computer name property, it'll attach itself to the computer name parameter. So you could get a bunch of computers from Active Directory, use select object to rename their name property to a computer name property, and then pipe those computer objects to this commandlet, get process, and it'll go out and retrieve the processes from all of those commandlets. Here's basically what that would look like. First of all, you need to have the import module Active Directory. I believe I've already done that. Yep, that's there. So I'm going to get AD computer. I'm going to specify a filter of all because I don't have a lot of computers in my lab domain, but you might use this to filter it down by name or probably by organizational unit, I'm thinking. They have a name property, so we're going to change that to select. We're going to create a computer name column instead, and its contents are going to be whatever the computer's name is. And if I do that, you can see it produces a computer name column with the name of the computer, and then you would just pipe that to select process, or get process, or get service, but not get event log, because get event log isn't binding that to pipeline input. So just a really useful set of changes, the ability to be able to specify a remote computer. Get event log, computer, Win 2008 R2. Let's say we're going to do this on the, I'll let it prompt me. Let's just say the newest 10, but it should prompt me for the log name. We'll do security. And there's the 10 newest from the security log on that remote computer. Definitely a very useful trick to be able to have. All right, so that's our top two. What's number 3? Select string. Now, the select string commandlet is kind of PowerShell's version of grep, although grep doesn't have the same use in PowerShell because PowerShell is working with objects. But if you're parsing text log files or something like that, that's its job, is to find specific bits of text. Now, there are some new parameters. Let me just kind of run through them real quick, and then I'll show you a couple. One is all matches. It used to be when select string found a match on a particular line of a text file, it only showed you that first match. Now it'll keep going and show you all the matches if you tell it all matches. You've also got this -context switch. And what that lets you do is say, if I'm looking at a line that's matched out of a text file, I can't just look at that line all by itself and determine what it is or what it's going to do for me. I also want to see the 2 lines before and after that. So I want to see the line in context. And then you've also got the -not match, which will show you lines that don't match the pattern you provided. So let me just kind of run through a couple of examples. I've got a really simple file. Let's get content strings.txt. And I'm going to run select string, c strings.txt. Now, you can also point this at a directory. So you can give it a path. You can have it parse an entire directory full of files. You can also just pipe a bunch of files to it, or pipe a bunch of strings to it. So we're just going to do it out of that one file. The pattern I want to match is the word line. That's a simple match. It's not a regular expression. And let me just show you the default without any of the new features. So it matched line 1, line 3, and line 6 because those all have the word line in them. Now let's add some context and see the lines before and after. So you can see it's showing you a little arrow to tell me that that's the matching line, but this is the line you asked for context. And then that would be the line before and after line 3, which matched, and this is the line before line 6. So let's go in and edit strings.txt. This is line 3, and line 3 is a line. We'll save that, close it. Let's run that exact same command again. So you see, I get to see the entire line. If I run -all matches, it will make sure it grabs the whole thing. In this case, because the line doesn't stream off the edge of the screen, it's not a big deal. But that's the basic thing. I really like the inclusion of context in particular. And while we're here, we're kind of halfway through our roundup. Let me show you something interesting. Help about PowerShell 2.0. Nope, that's not it. I forget the name of it. Just help about star. Oops. Help about _star. And there is a help about PowerShell version 2 features in here. Here it is, help about Windows. I should have known, Windows PowerShell 2.0. That'll describe some of these and other new features as well. So that's actually where I found out about these changes to the select string, is by kind of browsing that content, and then it refers you off to some other help files to read. And if you kind of spend a few minutes, spelunking around in those help files, you do kind of run across these new features. And I have a lot of customers that have me parsing IIS log files, which are text, to find the IP address from a particular computer that was accessing a particular website, and select string is the perfect way to do it. So now I'm really glad I know about some of these new features on it. That brings us to number 4, which is actually, and I said this, it's a new commandlet, but it's picking up some functionality that used to be attached to the set psdebug commandlet. And what this does is it establishes and enforcing, as it says here, coding rules. So it tries to create a stricter, less permissive scripting environment to help you avoid bugs. So there's a lot of things that PowerShell scripting environment will let you do for convenience reasons that if you do them a lot, or you're not really aware of all the subtleties under the hood, it can kind of create some problems for you. So let's look at the full version of this help. First of all, set strict mode off. Pretty clear. That also turns off set psdebug-strict, and this is the old thing that still exists that used to do what set strict mode does now. There used to only be one version of strictness, so it was set psdebug-strict or not. Well, now there are multiple levels of strictness. So set psdebug-strict still has an effect, but you're really going to want to stick with the set strict mode. So the version is where you set your level of strictness. In version 1, you're not allowed to have references to uninitialized variables, except for uninitialized variables contained within strings. So it wasn't very strict. Version 2 protects you from a lot of other things that you could do. You also cannot have references to uninitialized variables. You cannot have references to non-existent properties of an object. You cannot have function calls that use the syntax for calling methods, and you cannot have a variable name without a $sign. So here's kind of what you could run into before. Let's talk about that first one there, references to non-existent properties of an object. Let's set get services equal to a variable. Services, let's take the first one, flubby. Now that's not a real property, but it's going to let me do it. So that's what that would no longer allow. Rather than just saying, nothing happened, haha, it's all fine. It would actually do an error if I set it to strict mode of 2.0. Prevent function calls that use the syntax for calling methods. This was another way. Let's say I had a function, my function, and I created a parameter 1, and we would just have it right host 1 with a foreground color of yellow. Oops, I've got to spell function correctly, don't I? You were supposed to catch that. Okay. Now if I just say my function hello, hello will go into the parameter 1 and it'll get printed out in yellow. This is also a legal way to do it. This is the method call syntax where I wrap that in parentheses. And it is supported. It's not technically correct, but PowerShell will let you get away with it because I haven't turned on strict mode. So by turning on strict mode, you can kind of prevent yourself from doing things that are incorrect that might potentially generate unexpected results within a script and lead you to spend a lot of time debugging. A perfect example, take services 0. Let's say in a script, I just wanted to display the name of the service, and so I typed this, and I just typoed it. It's not that I got it wrong. I know there's no NME property. But without strict mode turned on, it's going to let me do that and not get an error. So I'm going to spend a lot of time looking at my script wondering why is it not printing anything? Because in a script, it's kind of hard to see this one little letter missing. And so by turning on strict mode, you'll get an error that'll tell you the line that the problem is on, and so you can go to that line and spot the problem. So let's look at some of the differences. I'm going to set strict mode to version 2.0, and now I'm going to do that services 0 NME, and now I get an error. So useful tricks, good things to know, and definitely something that you can decide to do for yourself to kind of ease that potential debugging nightmare. And that brings us to the last one on our hit parade, get member. As you know, if you get a bunch of objects and pipe them to get member, it displays their members. Well, there's actually a lot going on under the hood. PowerShell is adapting this object. This is a .NET Framework object. PowerShell is adapting it to work inside the PowerShell environment. And sometimes that involves changing property names or method names or something else. PowerShell is also extending these things. And the getMember commandlet now allows you to specify which members you want to see. I can choose to see the base members. And you'll notice I don't have any script properties or alias properties or script methods or anything else. I can choose to see the extensions, extensions that PowerShell adds, which are these two alias properties. I can choose to see just the adapted object, or I can choose to see everything. Now, the default is to display extended and adapted. So, depending on the exact type of object you're working with, you may be looking at different members depending on which parameter, which view parameter you're using with getMember. If you look at help with getMember, it'll remind you. It'll tell you that the view goes to extended, adapted, base, or all. And as always, if you look at the full help for the view, it'll tell you what the defaults are down here as well. The default is adapted and extended. Now, there's another new parameter on this thing. Whoa, scrolled way too far. -force. And that will add intrinsic members, such as PS-base, PS-adapted, PS-object, and PS-type names, and any compiler-generated methods to the display. Let me show you the difference there. Let's view all and -force. So we've got a lot more stuff on here. We've got the PS adapted, PS base, PS extended, and PS object member sets. And we've also got all of these getters and setters, all these gets that go with these methods, and the sets. So it really is a very extended, maximum amount of information version of getMember. Now, a difference you may see between the standard output in version 2 is that it is just extended and adapted. In version 1, getMember was a lot more permissive and it showed a lot more things. So it might look like things have been taken away from you, and they haven't. They've just been hidden, because for the most part, you're never going to use those get and set methods. You're just going to access properties. And those get and set methods are actually just what make the properties work under the hood. So getMember is really just hiding a lot of the under the hood stuff that you don't need to see as much of, so that you can kind of, just focus on the stuff that really matters to you. In this nugget, we focused on some of the small and I guess you could call them miscellaneous improvements in PowerShell version 2, particularly to a lot of the key commandlets. We looked at an improvement to PowerShell.exe that lets you launch it, say as a scheduled task or from a batch file, and to minimize or hide the window so that it can kind of stay out of users' way. We also looked at some changes to commandlet name resolution, which will be really important, especially if you start writing functions that wrap around an existing commandlet. And then we looked at my top 5 commandlet improvements. Convert to HTML, which now makes it really easy to add style and panache to your HTML output. We talked about the general improvements to some of the commandlets like get service, stop service, get process, get event log, and so forth. We also looked at some improvements to select string that make it a bit more useful. And we looked at some of the functionality that's moved to the new set strict mode commandlet. Some things that were kind of previously lumped on the set ps debug commandlet have now gotten their own command. And finally, we looked at the improvements to getMember, which allows you to be a little bit more specific about what members you want to see when you pipe an object in. I hope this has been informative